Hello, and welcome everyone to Quaver PLC's Leaders in Education. My name is Kim Biskner, and I am an implementation specialist at Quaver Ed. In this session, we will discuss how to identify and support students experiencing anxiety. I am excited to introduce you to our guest today, Dr. Leigh Bagwell. Dr. Leigh Bagwell is a member of the School Counseling Core Faculty in the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Capella University. Dr. Leigh earned her doctorate in counselor education and supervision from the University of Tennessee. She began her career as an elementary and middle school counselor before moving to leadership and supervisory roles in school counseling in pre-K through 12 education. She ultimately served as the Director of School Counseling Services for the Tennessee Department of Education. She has authored 2 books in the 15-minute focus series, including Anxiety, Worry, Stress, and Fear, and served as an editorial consultant on several children's books. As a school counseling leader, her mission is to provide school counselors and administrators with the training and resources needed to deliver high-quality, student-driven, data-informed, comprehensive school counseling programs to all students. Welcome, Dr. Bagwell. We are so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here with you.
Our conversation today is going to focus on student anxiety. What led you to study this topic, or why did you feel like it was an area in need of further research?
Yeah, so in my experience, I saw a lot of students really experiencing a lot of pressure, pressure to perform, pressure to achieve, pressure to meet expectations, and then that pressure to fit in that came along with social media. That added a whole lot more to their plates in terms of trying to fit in as they're trying to figure out who they are. And so we saw an increase of students expressing and reporting feelings of anxiety. And then the pandemic came along. And so students on top of that were feeling and dealing with, much more isolation, a lot more uncertainty. And so naturally their anxiety increased as well. And so, just seeing our kids hurting, touched a tender spot in me and wanting to know, how do we help them? How do we figure out, how do we support them where they are and help them to kind of reestablish a sense of self-control, a sense of normal, a sense of safety. And that led me into some work with anxiety. I've also experienced anxiety. And so, from a personal place as well, wanting to understand what is happening. Like, why do I feel this way? Why can't I not think myself out of this? As a counselor, I put a lot of pressure on myself to be able to, I shouldn't feel this way. And so those really motivated me to dig into the research, to understand what was happening so that I could understand how to address it and overcome it. And we, a lot of our students have a lot of really great things, that they're working towards. And, their anxiety was a barrier to that. And so I really wanted to help figure out, how do we remove that barrier for them?
I really appreciate you sharing this with us, and I think it will resonate with a lot of our viewers. So what does anxiety look like in this current moment for students and educators?
Yeah. So anxiety is, it's worrying about fitting in. It's the fear of missing out. It's, trying to meet expectations that they place on themselves, that others are placing on themselves. It's figuring out who they are in this big world. For a long time, for many of us, our world was very small. We didn't have access to this thing called the internet. We certainly didn't have social media. So we didn't have all of this to compare ourselves to and to try to process. And our students are trying to figure all of that out. And some of them are not developmentally at a place where they can figure it all out. But yet they're facing the consequences of having access to that information all at the same time. And so really, as they are navigating this space, it fills them with a lot of worry and stress and, trying to figure out who they are and how to be successful and how to get from moment to moment. And so they need our support in order to do that.
So as we are having these conversations more often about how to best support those students, we sometimes hear the words stress and anxiety used interchangeably, But that's not quite accurate. Could you help clarify the relationship between stress and anxiety?
Sure. So they are related, and you do hear them a lot together. What we know about stress, we think about that a lot as that pressure, pressure to perform, to meet a deadline. A lot of times it motivates us. It can be good, but if we don't aren't equipped with the skills to manage it, it can be overwhelming. And it can lead to anxiety. Anxiety is an overarching experience that stress is a part of. When we think about anxiety, it is really about a perceived or real threat to a person's safety. And that safety can be physical safety, it can be emotional safety, it can be social safety, but anything where, particularly if we think about students, where they feel like something is going to threaten their safety. That is what that excessive worry and concern kind of evolves into that level of anxiety that becomes problematic. We know that anxiety is rooted in fear. So there's a fear associated with those feelings. Fear of missing out, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not measuring up, fear of perhaps measuring up, fear of success. So there's a lot that could be driving that we see with anxiety that we don't necessarily see with stress.
Thank you for clarifying that relationship and underlining the real importance of that fear. So when a student is feeling that fear, experiencing the anxiety, what is happening physiologically? So what is happening in that student's body or brain when they're experiencing anxiety?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting part of the research that I came across. And I want to be really clear, I'm not a neuroscientist at all, but I thought it was just fascinating to learn about the physiological part of anxiety and what's happening in our brain. In anxiety, we're dealing with three parts of our brain. We have our thinking brain, which is called the cerebrum. We have our feeling brain, which is called the amygdala. And then we have our survival brain, which is the brainstem. And the brainstem controls all of those kind of automatic systems in our bodies. So breathing, our blood flow, those types of things. And so what happens is when we have a threat, whether it's a real threat or a perceived threat, the amygdala, that feeling part of our brain, takes over and it's like, oh, wait, stop. We might be in danger. And so what's really interesting is the amygdala sends the message to the thinking part of our brain and shuts it down. And so we no longer have the ability to rationally think through the situation because the amygdala is taking over because it's reacting to that fear. In addition to shutting down the thinking part of our brain, it sends a message to our brainstem, that survival part, to say, we've got to survive this threat. And so what happens is one of four actions happens, what we call the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. And so some people might have heard of the fight or flight response, and some people might have heard it got expanded to the fight, flight, or freeze response. And now we have the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. It's a mouthful. But what those words mean is it kind of categorizes our automatic response to that fear, that threat that we exhibit. So if you imagine that you're walking along in a park and you see a tiger, your amygdala goes, oh, wait, hang on. I might be in danger here. This is a tiger. And so it sends a message to our brainstem that says, we got to save ourselves. And so a fight response would be like, oh, I'm going to take on the tiger. I'm going to fight it. I'm going to take it down. It's not going to take me out. The flight response is I'm getting out of Dodge. I'm running. I'm getting out of here. The freeze response is, I'm going to get really still and maybe it's not going to see me and, it's going to go away. That's how I'm going to maintain my safety. And the fawn response, which is a relatively new discovery in the research, is kind of a bargaining strategy. So I'm going to bargain with the tiger. You don't want to eat me. I don't taste very good. I'm going to try to appease you. I'm going to give you the snack I'm carrying with me so that you eat the snack and not me. And so what we see when our, amygdala has taken over and it's reacting to that, whatever that perceived threat is that our body starts to say, I'm going to do one of these four things in an effort to survive. And so when a student is experiencing anxiety, when they've been triggered by whatever it is that they perceive a threat, this is what's happening in their brain. And what is really interesting about this information when I talk to educators is that it's not a cognitive thinking process. And I think what we've seen in the past is that we try to reason with students when they're in the midst of those moments. And we try to say, like, why are you doing this? What you're processing with them? And because the amygdala has shut down our cognitive thinking part of our brain, they can't do it. And so it's been their inability to reason and process and think about it has been misinterpreted as misbehavior, as defiant behavior, those kinds of things. When in actuality, what the research is telling us is that we need, not just students, but adults, need 30 minutes to an hour for our brain to reset and for our cognitive brain to kick back in before they're able to really talk through what's happened and to even go back and say, well, that wasn't a real tiger, it was a statue of a tiger, right? And so it's that point that we're able to really kind of get at what is going on with that fear.
Wow, it sounds like a lot is happening inside of a student's mind when they're experiencing anxiety, and they might not be able to verbalize it to us.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, how does that manifest externally, and what might an educator be looking for to recognize that a student might be experiencing anxiety?
Yeah, so anxiety is an internalizing condition, but there are some external behaviors and actions that we can pick up on to let us know that something's going on with our student. And what we say we really want to look for is change in students' behavior and their actions and their attitudes and their emotions. Noticing something different. Are they acting different? Are they sad? Are they withdrawn? Are they disengaging? Watching for those changes. And if they aren't explained by something, that's clear to the educator, it might be related to anxiety. And so it's important to, for the teacher or the educator to get to know what's happening with their student. There are some symptoms that we can see. Certainly if you've had anxiety before, you might have had, sweaty palms or dry mouth, or, felt your heartbeat fast, or, headaches and stomach aches. Certainly we see that. Having trouble sleeping, not being able to concentrate, those kinds of things are some of those more external behaviors that teachers and educators can look for.
So if an educator does recognize some of those changes and they think that a student might be experiencing anxiety, what are some of the interventions that they might be able to put into place to support that student? And how might those interventions differ for different roles? So a classroom teacher or a counselor or an administrator?
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember that anxiety is rooted in fear. And so there's an element of this where the student is not feeling safe. So regardless of the role, we want to help the student feel safe. And so reassuring them that they are safe is a good first step. I think for the classroom teacher, knowing the student first is important. If you don't know your student, you're not going to be able to identify with those changes. So really investing on the front end to know who they are, know what they like, know what their mannerisms are, know their strengths, know their areas of growth, so that you can monitor for some of those changes. And don't be afraid to reach out to them. Anxiety is a very isolating condition. And so what we hear from lots of students is they're afraid to reach out for help. And so they really do want the adults in their lives to make that first move. So as a classroom teacher, coming up alongside of a student and saying, I'm noticing that, you seem nervous today, or that you're withdrawn today. Is everything okay? Making that kind of a normal part of how we run our classrooms creates a safer space for them. Reinforcing coping skills, and appropriate coping skills is really important. So we know a lot of students suffer from test anxiety. So that, we have a test coming up and students get nervous, that fear there is associated usually with failing. And so practicing, whether it's, some deep breathing, practicing mindfulness as a class, making it more of a prevention type activity can help set that standard. Like, this is how we do things, and we're going to practice these skills so as a class, so that everybody has them in their toolbox, and then reminding those individual students that may need a little extra help. Those are some things that we can do. We've seen some really creative teachers that set up spaces in their classroom, whether they usually call them calm down corners, where they have things set up where students can kind of step over to those spaces when they're feeling nervous, and they're, things that they can do, whether it's, playing with fidget toys, or listening to calming music, or, coloring on a coloring sheet, or journaling, those kinds of things that we know are good at kind of calming down some of those feelings. So those are some of the strategies we see teachers using. as counselors, we want to utilize our training to help students get at that fear. Like, what is the fear driving the anxiety? We're trained for counseling and utilizing those skills in schools. So helping students identify what is it that we're afraid of, and then how do we address that? And recognizing if it's something outside of our scope, then connecting the families and the students to those in our community that can help them, but really giving them the skills to address, are we really afraid of that tiger, or is there something else, going on? And so we can help support in that way. School counselors can also help teachers in building those calm corners and teaching those coping skills and those kinds of things. So we can serve directly students in helping them, and then also, be a consultant and collaborator with the other educators in our building. And I think for administrators, it's really important to take the time to find out what's driving behavior that has become disruptive. Certainly, if behavior is disrupting instruction, it's something we need to address. A lot of times, though, students with anxiety may look like they're being disruptive. So taking the time to understand what's happening with our students, why they're engaging in some of that behavior. But also recognizing, we go back to that brain stuff, for some students, they may need an hour even before they're even able to talk about it and process what's going on. So for an administrator who's handling, discipline type issues, building into your process time for the student to calm down, building in time to process with the student what's happening so that we can give them what they need. And that way we're helping to reinforce those positive coping skills, and we're really able to get at what is causing the disruption.
Thank you for sharing all of those ideas. It does sound like there is a lot we can do in school buildings to support students experiencing anxiety.
Yeah.
You did mention, too, connecting with families. So I imagine in a lot of situations, anxiety is not specific to the school building. So how can we partner with families to make sure students are supported outside of school as well?
Absolutely. And you're exactly right. Usually if a student is experiencing anxiety at school, they're experiencing it outside of school as well. And so I think it's important for us to go back to that first step of education, helping our parents understand what's happening inside of their students' brains, what they are experiencing when they're having anxiety. And so, just explaining that idea around that they feel a threat and they're reacting to it, and that there's an element of fear, and trying to get to the bottom of that, I think is very eye-opening for parents when they understand it's not just a behavior choice. They're not choosing to be anxious. So arming them with that kind of information, I think, is really important. And then helping them, giving them good coping skills that they can practice with their students at home is also really important, whether it's, helping them to build a calm down kit at home, the plastic water bottles that they can make with glitter and shake, and, building playlists that are calming music, or spending quality time together doing something calming, or going for a walk and, reading books together. Those are really helpful strategies that reinforce that student's feeling of safety, and helping families identify, what is going to help your child feel safe. And just when we think about what's helpful for students, when they're trying to meet different expectations, that creates anxiety. So when the parents at home and those of us at school are working together to create the same expectations, and we're using the same language, that in and of itself is an intervention to help reduce the anxiety that a student may feel. So it's really bringing parents and families and school folks all together to surround a student and give them the support and say, we're here for you, we're working together to let you know that you are safe, and we're going to help support you so that you can be successful.
I love that idea of those really collaborative interventions.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, on the front end as well, not just interventions, but are there any strategies for prevention? What can educators do to either prevent or mitigate those feelings of anxiety?
Sure. So I think it goes back to starting with education, helping students understand what's happening when they're experiencing anxiety, understanding those three parts of our brains that are activated, and what's happening, and why they can't think their way through it. It can be really scary when their body starts responding and they can't really explain or understand why. So arming them with that kind of information can be really empowering. Teaching students about triggers, letting them know, there are going to be some things that might be threatening, that might kind of, You might find a fear associated with that. And so helping them to identify, are there things that happen in your body when you start to feel that anxiety coming on? So helping them to identify those early on so they can intervene and keep that amygdala at bay and keep those responses from, fully happening. And then teaching them appropriate coping skills so that they know before they ever start to feel anxiety, what are some things that I can do when I start to feel a little anxious, whether they're breathing skills, lots of breathing techniques, whether it's, taking a moment in a calming corner, thinking about, things that to bring them peace and help them to be still, and helping them advocate for themselves, letting them know who they can talk to, helping them know that they're in a safe environment. Those can be really empowering as well. I think also from a prevention standpoint, making sure that at school we're sending the right message, helping them understand, what the expectations are, that we've got clear expectations and that we're communicating those. One of the things that we can do is to create a safe space for all of our students. If a space is not safe for one student, it's not safe for all students.
You have shared so much information with us about student anxiety. I'm wondering how that might also connect to the experiences of adults who experience anxiety. What advice might you have for educators who experience anxiety themselves?
Yes, absolutely. So, children are not unique in their experience of anxiety. The adults are feeling it too. And as educators, we know that our students are looking to us to take their cues on how to handle those really intense feelings. And so it's up to us. We've got to learn about how anxiety impacts us as well. The same process that's happening in our students' brains, it's happening in ours too. And so as adults, understanding, what are the fears that are driving our anxiety? What are the things that we're experiencing that are that we feel like are threatening to us, and then building a really strong toolbox of our own coping strategies. How do we handle it when we start to feel that threat, when we start to feel those anxiety triggers, and then model those for our students. I think it's really important for adults to not be afraid to be authentic with our students. They know when we try to pretend like, oh, we've got it all together, I'm feeling great, and yet they see us over at our desk or over behind in the corner, like freaking out. They're watching us. And so what we know from hearing from students is they want to know the truth. Like they want to see us and hear from us about how we're handling those really tough feelings. Mm-hmm. And so when we can be honest about them and honest about like, this is how I'm feeling and this is how I'm working to manage that, it really empowers our students. One, to let them know they're not alone, but two, like, okay, here's somebody else that I admire or somebody that I trust. And this is a skill that they're using to manage their feelings. And maybe it's something that I can do as well. The goal with anxiety is not to get rid of it. We're not going to get rid of anxiety. It's always going to be there. But our goal is to learn how to manage it, to learn how to minimalize it so that when we have those threats, when we encounter those triggers, we've got the tools in place to help keep our amygdala in check so it doesn't kind of freak out and send us in that, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. But we're able to say, wait a minute. Let me evaluate this threat. Let me see, is this really a threat or is it not as bad as I think it is? And prevent us from really having our anxiety kind of, exacerbate and get out of control and have those really intense feelings. And so as adults, when we can learn to do that and model that for our kids, that we become a great example to them. And we are in a better place with our own mental health and wellness.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you reiterating that caring for ourselves then allows us to better care for our students.
Absolutely. There's a reason they tell us to put our masks on first when we get in the airplane. If we can't take care of ourselves, we're in no shape to be able to take care of others first.
Absolutely. So as we begin to wrap up here with all of this excellent information you've shared, do you have any parting words of wisdom or encouragement for our viewers?
So I think, again, knowing that anxiety is really rooted in fear. One of the things that I've pulled from all of this research and my experience and kind of summed up into a kind of a phrase is that knowledge is the antidote to fear. When we can understand and get information around what is causing us fear, it reduces our fear and thus reduces our anxiety. And so when we can take that approach and be open and willing to learn and to explore those things that are causing us fear, those threats, then we really are empowering ourselves to help control and manage our own feelings of anxiety and reduce those so that we're better able to manage and control our situation and the world around us.
Dr. Bagwell, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really appreciated hearing your expertise.
Thank you so much. It's been a joy to be with you.
And thank you all for joining us today. We hope this discussion has resonated with you and that you've gained new insights to put into practice. We are thrilled to continue sharing Quaver PLC Leaders in Education with you and look forward to continued future growth together. Thank you.